The trail of muddy footprints led off the front stoop, tracked across the gravel driveway, and disappeared into the darkened woods. David Carnswell had no choice but to follow. He didn't want to. That much went without saying. He wanted to shut the door, lock the deadbolts, crawl back into bed with his wife of 4 decades, and doze off to sleep like he'd never heard those 3 hollow knocks to begin with. But what David wanted held no weight. David needed to follow those footprints. Nothing less than the survival of humanity was at stake. Hiya, I'm Orla. Thank you for joining me. Today I'm going to talk about The Caretaker by Marcus Kliewer. This is a book that falls into the horror, thriller, mystery, and paranormal genres. It's not something that I would usually read. I'm usually very much a fantasy reader. Sometimes I'll read a bit of historical fiction, but definitely horror is not my usual genre. So I am reading this one today because I'm part of a book club that's run by a Bookish podcast that I listen to, and their book for the month is The Caretaker. So I said I'd follow along, I'd give the book a read, and then I would share my thoughts with you guys. So thank you so much for joining me. I'll kick it off by telling you about the author. So Marcus Kliewer is a Canadian author and a stop motion animator. His debut novel was We Used to Live Here, and that started off as a short story on a Reddit subreddit. He won the Scariest Story of 2001 award as part of the No Sleep subreddit for that short story, and from there it got adapted and turned into a full-length novel. So The Caretaker is his second novel, and it came out in April of 2026. The story itself comes with a couple of reader warnings. So it does deal with topics like OCD, depression, grief, um, um, suicidal ideation, that sort of stuff. He doesn't sugarcoat it in the book. It's all very much front and center when he's discussing it. So if that is not something that you're interested in reading, that this might be a book for you to sit out on. The book itself is described as a supernatural psychological horror novel, and yeah, I think I would 100% agree with that. Um, I'll give you a really brief overview, and then I'll dive into the book summary in a little bit more detail. So, The Caretaker is a supernatural horror novel about Macy Mullins, a financially struggling young woman who takes a mysterious, high-paying 3-day house-sitting job in the Oregon wilderness to care for her younger sister. She soon faces a waking nightmare of incomprehensible evil and complex reality-bending rites. So that's a real abbreviated version of what happens in the story. I'll go into a bit more detail now. This is going to be a spoiler-free review as much as I can. The idea is to describe the book to you and give you my thoughts on it without ruining the reading experience for you as well. So yeah, we'll just jump straight into it. The setting is in Oregon, so that's, I believe, the west coast of the US. It's set in this isolated home in the middle of the wilderness on the Oregon coast. And it's quite an affluent home. The owners are quite wealthy. It's a big, sprawling, not quite a manor, but a pretty large house. Um, the protagonist of the story is Macy Mullins. So she's a young woman who is grieving the death of her father. So her father passed away 2 years prior to the story. And she's trying to raise her younger sister Gemma um on the back of that. Their mother, I believe, left when they were younger, so they didn't have any relationship with her. but their father played a really, really key figure in their life. They seemed to be very close to him. He owned a landscaping business, and they used to work with him at the weekends on the landscaping jobs. And you get the impression that Macy just idolized her father, that she just thought he was absolutely amazing, and his loss has hit her really, really hard. So 2 years on, she's still in the depths of grief. She's not able to look at a lawnmower or a freshly cut grass without thinking about him and without it really, really upsetting her. So she really, really is in the depths of her grief. Um, so after her father passed away, his landscaping business got bought over by a larger company, and Macy worked with that larger company for a while, but she just couldn't stick with it because her grief and missing her father so much just meant that she couldn't continue in that line of work. So she left that job, and then that kind of led to like a 2 year spiral of unsuccessful job interviews, um, getting positions but not staying in them for too long for various reasons. A lot of kind of customer service work that just was really unfulfilling, or where she had to deal with really unpleasant people, so she didn't stay in it. And this means that when the story kicks off, she's in dire straits. They've been handed their eviction notice by their landlord. She's overdue on bills. Her sister needs an inhaler and she can't afford to buy it for her. So she's just really, really desperate for work, to the point where she sees a ad on Craigslist asking for someone to help care for an elderly man, and she goes to the interview even though it takes her an hour on the bus and then an additional 30-minute walk. So I think the effort that she went through just to attend the interview for the job really, really highlights how desperate she was for work and how desperate she was to make some sort of income so that she could care for her younger sister. When she gets to the interview, she realizes it's a bit of a bait and switch. The elderly man has actually passed away, and the woman interviewing Macy is his wife. And she's saying, actually, I don't need a caretaker for my husband, but I need a caretaker for my house. I'm going to a family reunion. I'm going to be gone for about 3 days. And I promised my husband that I would fulfill these rituals every night. So they call them rites in the story. And the wife says, look, I need to do these rituals out every single night. I promised it to my husband. Here's a videotape. If you agree to the job, you will learn what those rituals are. And Macy at first is like, hang on now, you promised me one thing and now you're offering me something else. That's not really cool. And then the lady is like, basically, I'll give you thousands of dollars to do this. So she makes it really, really hard for Macy to turn down the job. Um, Even the first installment of the payment is enough for her to pay her bills, pay her rent, get groceries, and so on. So she makes it really, really hard for Macy to turn down the job. So she accepts it, and she gets the video and she goes home and watches it, and it's been recorded by the husband, David, and he's describing all of these rites that you have to do every single day in order to keep the visitors away and keep them at bay. And if you fail to do any of these rites, it sets off this chain reaction of bad things that are going to happen. And ultimately, if you don't achieve all these rites, if you don't follow them to the specific instructions that he's left, it's going to trigger the end of the world and trigger the end of humanity. So the stakes are high. The stakes are high, and Macy is on the fence about whether or not she actually believes that this is going to happen. And that's kind of the theme for the rest of the book. It's, are these rights necessary? Are they just the delusions of an elderly man who wasn't well towards the end of his life? What will actually happen if she doesn't follow the rights? Like, what is the worst that could happen? Like, one of the rights that she has to follow is making sure all of the lights in the house are turned off between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. Excuse me. And it's like, what's the worst that could happen if she actually does that? Um, and I won't spoil it. I won't go into any details. So if you want to know what does happen or what doesn't happen, you're going to have to read the book to find out for yourself. Um, but yeah, no, I'm not going to go into any more detail than that about the summary because I don't want to spoil it for you. It's a good book. I really enjoyed it. It was a short read. It's only about 300 pages, so I think I finished it in a couple of days. Um, I mean, the long story short of it is it absolutely terrified me. It's a slow burning horror, so it starts off fairly normal, and then as the story progresses, the tension builds and the dread builds with each page and each chapter, and you find yourself getting really, really sucked in, like, and really curious about what is going to happen. Um, like I said, I don't usually read horror stories, but I did read this because of the book club recommendation, and I found myself getting spooked, not gonna lie. I'm the kind of person who jumps easily and startles easily anyway. And I'm also a little bit uncomfortable of the dark, let's say. So I found that I actually had to stop reading it before going to bed because in my room in the dark, because I was reading on my Kindle, um, yeah, sitting in my room in the dark, reading this story where lights have to be kept on or kept off, otherwise something bad happens. And it did get a bit spooky. And, God forbid I had to get up and use the bathroom with all the lights off. So, yeah, I did end up having to stop reading it before going to bed because it was just giving me the chills and giving me the spooks. Which, considering it's a horror, I think that's a really good that's a really good positive for the story. I think that's a really good endorsement of how good of a horror it is. If it was giving me like spooks and chills and creeps, and I had to only read it during the day when it was bright and when I would have like a bit of a gap between reading and going to bed. And I did have to follow it up with something that was a bit gentler. I had to follow it up with a nice cozy fantasy, which I will be talking about in my next video. Um, yeah, so definitely as I was reading it, my imagination was running away with me. It was very, very descriptive. It delved into the characters' backstories really well. It started off with like a gentle introduction, and then as the story progressed, it dove deeper and deeper into the characters' backstories. So you got a really, really clear idea of who they are, what motivated them. You got a better understanding for why certain decisions were made. You really felt empathy for Macy and her sister because they did seem to have just a really tragic past with their mother leaving and then their father passing away. And you really felt Macy's desperation in trying to care for her sister. Like the grief that Macy was experiencing was just completely debilitating. And yet, the only thing that was keeping her going was the desire and the drive to care for her sister, to make sure that she was well looked after and that she had everything that she needed. Um, yeah, like I said, it's not a huge book. The first half of the book I felt was where all the tension was. So it was ramping up, ramping up, ramping up. And then once you hit the second half of the book, that was where kind of the horror element really, really came in. It was done in sort of a yes but no and structure. Um, does Macy complete this right? Yes, but this thing happens, or no, and this other thing happens. So, I will have a video coming out at some point about story structure and outline that I'm trying to follow as I'm writing my own novel. And yes, but no, and is a really, really popular way of writing a story because especially in a story like this where you want to have a lot of tension. You need to kind of keep building up to the climax, and a really good way of building up to the climax is this good thing happens, but this thing also accompanies it that may not be what the protagonist desires, or this thing doesn't happen, which is really bad for the protagonist, and on top of that, this other bad thing happens. So it's just a way of building tension and working towards the climax, um, and increasing the conflict as the story goes on. Yeah, so the second half of the book was more horror than tension building. I found that the second half didn't spook me as much, and I think that was because um it was like there's this concept in when you're going there's a concept when you're working through like dealing with anxiety where it can be described as the anxiety is the door is closed and you know there's a tiger behind it. What happens? What if the door opens and the tiger gets into the room with you? But then once the door is open and the tiger is there and you have to deal with the situation, it kind of the anxiety gets trampled down because you have to deal with the immediate situation. And I think that was what happened with me while I was reading this. So in the first half, when the tension was being built, it was a lot of what if, what if, what if, what's going to happen, what's going on, is this happening, is this real? And then once it got into the second half, into the more horror element, it was like, okay, the tiger's in the room with me. I'm going through the horror. I don't have any issue with gory descriptions. I don't have any issues with like blood or dead bodies or any of that kind of stuff. So reading the gory side of the horror was actually fine for me. It was definitely the tension building that really got me on edge. So yeah, I kind of didn't enjoy it once I got into the horror stage. That's probably the wrong word to say, but um I could go back to reading it before bed. It didn't spook me as much. I feel like such a baby admitting this, but yeah, yeah. So that's just the reality. The pacing of it was really, really good. It kind of clicked along quite quickly. It yeah, there was no kind of flat bits. There was no filler. Like it wasn't that long a book, so it didn't really have space for filler. And I felt, yeah, the pacing was really well done. There was a moment in it. So Macy has to stay in the house for 3 days and 2 nights. And I did find after the first night, there was like a bit of a relief. And I was like, okay, that happened. She made it. Okay, that's a bit of a spoiler. She made it through the first night. But then you're like, oh my God, she has to go through all of that again for the second night. So I thought that was really good the way they did the pacing, that you're kind of, the book probably took place over maybe 4 days, and then there's the occasional flashbacks to the past, so you could learn a little bit more about the background. So I thought that was really good. I enjoyed that. It definitely was one of those stories that stayed with me for a few days after I'd finished it. It took me it took me a few days to decide if I actually enjoyed it or not, or how I actually felt about it. The ending was really ambiguous, and you were left with lots of open questions that sort of just ruminated in my mind afterwards. Um, and I actually did enjoy reflecting on those questions after I finished the book. I found myself thinking about different details throughout the story over the next few days, and saying, well, with this detail, it makes you think that this was what happened, but then this other detail makes you think that something different happened. So yeah, it had a lovely ambiguous ending that left it really up to you to think about what was the outcome. Was all of this real? Was it not real? Um, the one thing that I really didn't enjoy about the story were references to real world pop culture. Like the song Happy by Pharrell Williams was mentioned. One of the characters was wearing like a fitness band that was mentioned by brand name, but all of that is more of a personal preference than anything to do with the writing. I prefer when I'm reading a story to just get thrown into the world of the story. And if I get reminded of the world outside of the story during that, it just kind of knocks me out a bit. And but again, like I said, that's a personal preference. I wouldn't dock marks for it. I wouldn't say that was necessarily a bad thing about the story. It was just something that I personally didn't enjoy. But yeah, personal preference. Overall, I thought it was really, really well written. And yeah, like I said before, I had really mixed feelings when I finished it. It did take me a little while to decide if I liked it or if I didn't. And I actually did enjoy it. I did really, really like it. I think in terms of a rating, I would give it 3 stars out of 5, which for me would mean it's a good story that I enjoyed reading, but it's not necessarily one that I would read again. Um, but I did like it and I would definitely recommend it as it's kind of my first foray into horror. I don't know if I would recommend it to horror fans because you would probably have a better idea of what a good horror is than I would. But yeah, I mean, look, if you're looking for a nice quick read that spooks you a little bit, I think this would be a really good one to start off with. It was well written, the plot was great, the pacing was great, the characters were so real. Like at times they were frustrating that Macy would be doing things and you'd say, "Oh, come on, you just figure this out or sort this out," and that all just added to the depth of the character and the richness of the world that he built. So can't really complain about that, to be honest. So yeah, that was my review of The Caretaker by Marcus Kliewer. I hope you found it interesting and I hope you got something from it. Next time I'm going to be reviewing Assistant to the Villain, which is my cozy romantasy to help me recover from the horror of The Caretaker. And yeah, I'm going to try to get that video up in about a week. And I'll see you then. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you again soon. Bye.